بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. Brothers and sisters, so this is lesson 3. We had a very lengthy lesson 2, 4 topics, so 4-fold videos, mashallah. The subject matter is somewhat different or unique in that a lot of the fiqh books don't actually discuss this in an organized manner, meaning that the whole conversation around accountability, puberty, personal hygiene, etc., that we will be talking about today is kind of scattered in different places of fiqh books, and some of the kind of introductory primers that we study, even when we study them in seminary, Darul Ulum, and so on, kind of have the information scattered all over the place. Some of the bigger textbooks, I suppose, if you were to look carefully, you might find a section on one or two of these things, but you have to kind of look. And nothing that's accessible to the public actually addresses this very well, perhaps maybe with the exception of something like Beheshti Zewar, Beheshti Zewar, which I think has these sections. So I just want to cover this properly and systematically. So what I've done is basically gathered everything that's scattered in different places from various sources. Had to spend quite a lot of time preparing this, and I'm hoping that inshallah this will be this lesson will be a kind of sufficient information as to the essentials that people need to know with regards to accountability, the age of responsibility, if you want to, can be put like that as well, and puberty, which kind of are in a sense one and the same, and also additionally, I want to talk more broadly about matters of personal hygiene over and above the issue of purification. So as you know by now, of course, that purification has a really strong ritual and spiritual element to it, which can a person can make that work well with questions of personal hygiene, and a commitment to purification can result in a commitment to cleanliness, but it isn't necessarily so, right? And I have seen a kind of cognitive dissonance sometimes in practicing people, where somehow they feel as though that their commitment to ritual purification is sufficient expression of cleanliness, and I don't believe that is necessarily so. And so therefore it is important to address the issue of cleanliness, personal hygiene, etc. separately, so that people understand that that the question of cleanliness isn't contained within, or the conversation about cleanliness isn't contained within the conversation about purification, but it's an additional matter that the Quran and the Sunnah in particular has addressed, and the Prophet ﷺ has some very clear teachings with regards to this, as you will see, inshallah. So here we are, age of accountability, responsibility, puberty, what's known as bulugh, or becoming baligh, and personal hygiene is today's lesson, inshallah. Okay. This lesson has no subtopics, so just keep in mind that you'll find the video and everything you need on the actual lesson page, without a kind of another set of pages containing the topics, right? So everything will be on the lesson page. And there's nothing else to look for, and then we'll move on, inshallah, to wudu, which will be covered in a different lesson. Right. So let's move on to the slides, inshallah. So the age of responsibility is what we'll discuss first. The fuqaha have discussed different aspects of responsibility or accountability, I suppose there's different ways to put it, and the different stages that a person goes through as they mature from childhood to adulthood. And in fact, if you discuss it in detail, then they even talk about they talk about this the whole idea of accountability and responsibility quite holistically, so that the responsibilities of others towards a child can also be covered in that way, and they talk about it from the point of view both of responsibility as well as rights, and therefore the conversation kind of goes a little bit beyond the purview of what we want to talk about here, which is understanding at what age a young person becomes responsible and accountable for their actions, particularly with regards to worship, because of course our course is about purification and prayer. But maybe, inshallah, at some point I might record something, just a separate lesson perhaps, or just a video for everyone to access that talks about accountability in the broader sense. But inshallah, in today's lesson we will cover most of the things that are just practical. But just to give you a little snapshot, the fuqaha talk about the detailed stages that a child goes through all the way to adulthood, starting all the way from the time that a baby is in the womb as a fetus. So they actually talk about the stage of the fetus. Then there's the stage of childhood, which is from birth till the age of 7. Then the age of early responsibility or incomplete responsibility, which is the age of tamyiz, which is from 7 until they actually become baligh or mature and reach the age of responsibility. Then there is the age of responsibility, the age at which they become baligh completely. Then there is the age of rushd, or the age of complete independent intelligence, if you like. And that is the age at which the fuqaha have different ideas about it, but it's the age at which a young person kind of comes out from under the shadow of guardians, or may do. Although that the difference between being baligh and being completely mature is something of a practical difference. Technically, when a child becomes mature, they are completely responsible anyway. But it's a bit like how in contemporary society, in our society, for example, in the West, there is the notion of going through different stages, like there are different legal implications, for example, for a young person at different ages. So there's implications at 16, there's implications at 18, there's implications at 21. Whether that's to do with, the way whether they're considered a juvenile or not, whether they're accountable for their crimes, whether it's to do with some of their legal rights, voting rights, etc., whether it's to do with parental rights over them. Well, these are things that kind of the Islamic tradition has discussed and systematically kind of implemented a whole kind of jurisprudence around many long before the modern era. And that's basically what you see being discussed when you look at all of the different stages that a child goes through to reach complete maturity. And complete maturity, the fuqaha have different opinions about it, ranging from say 18 all the way till 25. Right? There's different opinions about it. for the most part, really, it doesn't have to be a kind of a fixed time as far as the time at which they become independent of their guardians. That can be something that their guardians kind of help arrive at as they notice, their level of intelligence and their ability to kind of independently decide things for themselves and make good choices and show wisdom and so on. Although sometimes political authorities or states may fix an age and say it's 18 or it's 19 or it's 21 and so on, which some Muslim countries both past and present have done. So what we're going to do here is we're going to kind of summarize all of that into two levels, and because we want to focus on the age of accountability. We want to focus on the age of accountability with respect to religious obligations, and therefore we want to summarize it and just stick to providing a kind of practical picture that tells us what we need to know, perhaps as young people growing up, but also as adults, as parents, as guardians, who may have young children, who they have to nurture, or already have children who are close to maturity and so on. So in that sense, there are two stages that a child goes through. So I turned on the laser pointer so you can follow that, inshallah. The first is incomplete responsibility and the second is complete responsibility. Okay, so I'd like to discuss both of them in some detail now. So the first is incomplete responsibility. When a person reaches a level of maturity that makes it suitable for them to dispose or discharge of some matters but not others, meaning they're able to administrate. When we say dispose of or discharge of matters, this is a translation of the Arabic term tasarruf, right? They now are able, or I suppose it's not so much ability, because ability is more a question of ability is either there or isn't there. But this is the age at which legally they're regarded to normally be able or have the ability to discharge of some matters and not others, or fulfill certain functions and not others. And the Sharia regards them to have reached an age where, were they, normally parents would still deal with it, but were they to end up in a situation where, for example, they had entered into some sort of a transaction and so on, or they had performed an act of worship, if that was to happen from them, then the question the Sharia wants to address is it legitimate from them? Is that legitimate? So that's what we mean. So when we say that it is suitable for them to dispose or discharge of some matters but not others, what we mean is that the Sharia recognizes their suitability. In social life, people do things before, people do things after. Some 5-year-olds will go to the shop and buy something. That is a transaction, right? There is actually a contractual process happening over here, which that child legally is actually too young to do. But it's socially accepted. The shopkeeper knows the child, they know the parents, and it happens. Life goes on. That's not a problem. But legally, the question still has to basically be asked: at what point is at what point can we deal with questions like something being legally binding, or their disposing of or deciding or administrating certain things being something that the Sharia would recognize as valid and suitable. That's really what we're talking about. It's a legal matter. So these are usually matters that are dependent upon the opinions of others, such as guardians. So usually, I suppose that shopkeeper example is a good one, because, what one could say to the shopkeeper, well, you sold something to a child and therefore it's invalid, which I suppose could be said if they were challenged. Then the technical decision, the way it would technically apply is that child is not of the age to be deemed suitable to be entering into a transaction or entering into a contract, and therefore it isn't binding. But that's if it became a matter of legal dispute. Normally, over a packet of sweets, nobody would do that, right? So the transaction would continue. But nevertheless, it will still have to happen. But when it does happen, even at this stage where it is suitable, it is understood that usually there is some sort of oversight from guardians, and ultimately things are recognized as valid or not based upon the opinion of their parents and their guardians. Okay, so when does a child reach this stage, right? What is the age? So a child reaches this stage after 7 years. This stage is called the stage of discernment, tamyiz. So this is when a child can understand the difference between things. They can understand, for example, in transaction, they can understand the difference between turning up to a shop and just taking sweets, right, or just being given things, and or the transaction of buying something in return for something. So buying something from the shop shelf in return for money, for example, they can discern this. They can understand these differences. They can understand the difference between right and wrong. They know that there are things that they're supposed to do. There are things that they're not supposed to do, right? They can follow rules. This kind of discernment they have. They may not make the right independent decisions, but they can understand things, right? And therefore they are discerning. They have tamyiz, and tamyiz is when you are able to tell the difference between things. Okay. So now in religious matters, a discerning child's prayer and fasting are valid, but not obligatory, right? So it is only, so for example, a discerning child, if they pray, they would know that they are praying. They might know the rules of prayer. They may even understand some of the significance of prayer. They may have been taught the virtue of prayer, so they know it, so they have good intention, etc., etc. They have firm faith, all of these things. So therefore it's valid, right? However, it isn't obligatory, because they're too young to be made accountable for something that requires discipline, consistency, etc. So it is only required of them as part of the process of nurturing and education, a duty that falls upon their parents and guardians. So when we say it's required of them, really, it means that there is an expectation for them to pray, but it's really an expectation for their parents to nurture them to pray. So it's actually by proxy, in the sense that it's their parents that are required. And this is, of course, based on the hadith, that or command your children to pray when they reach 7. And that, when we say command, we're not talking about kind of get up and pray and that kind of commanding and ordering. But what we mean basically is this is the stage at which children should start to understand that they are expected to pray, right? So they're taught it, and they're told, the way you might tell your child not to pick on another child, the way you would teach your child and command them not to lie and to tell the truth, to be good to other children, to share, these kind of things. In the same way that you tell them to eat their lunch, have their dinner, have their breakfast, and so on and so forth. You would also tell them to pray, right? And you teach them how to do it and nurture them towards it. And that process would begin at 7. So therefore, it would be an easy and relaxed process. But that the expectation begins from that. And were they to pray at this stage, their prayer would be valid. No obligation falls upon them due to and in the course of their worship, right? So some of the details of it, for example, they should, if they're being taught to pray, then they should be taught the whole thing. So they should be, if you've taught them to pray and they're praying, they should pray with wudu. But if they didn't, then there's no consequence. For example, if they didn't quite do their wudu properly, there's no consequence. If they began a prayer, so here the example I'm giving here is that if they begin a prayer, they're not obligated to complete it the way adults are, because as an adult, if you were to begin a prayer and then you break it, you must complete it. You're required to complete it, and therefore if you break it, the prayer must be repeated, even if it is a nafil. I mean, I'm sure everybody understands that idea when it comes to a fard, but even if it was a nafil prayer, there's a principle that any nafil, once begun, becomes obligatory to complete. And therefore, if you were to break it, You're not required to do it, but if you were to start it and then break it, then it becomes necessary to make qada of it, because it's required. Once you begin it, it's required of you to complete it. But no such obligation falls upon children who are of this age or going through this stage or this level of responsibility. Similarly, if they break or miss their prayers, they're not required to make them up. The same would apply to their fasts, and so on. Okay. Right. So that's basically incomplete responsibility, or in Arabic, the term is al-ahliya al-naqisa. Al-ahliya al-naqisa. So here we're talking, now we move on to complete responsibility, which is al-ahliya al-kamila. Okay. And this is the stage at which a person is able to independently discharge duties and responsibilities in a manner that is acceptable in the Sharia. Now, there's two aspects to this, right? One is that for the most part, unless they are special needs and so on, or there's something about them that is abnormal, extraordinary, and so on. If that's not the case, then for the vast majority, normally this would be an age at which they would be able to independently discharge their duties. Now, however, this is where society and culture and the way a child is nurtured can actually create huge differences. And this is the point that I want you to understand this very carefully, right? So I've observed children in the third world, so particularly in Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, during my travels. I've noticed that children who are as young as 9, 10, right, their level of responsibility towards their younger siblings, towards their parents, towards the family's welfare, the family's livelihood, their level of decision making, their level of independence, the way in which they're able to carry their families, even earn money for their families, their level of concern and care for their siblings, the way in which they're able to help their mothers nurture their younger siblings, and so on. It's phenomenal, right? And that level of responsibility in the West and in wealthier countries can be difficult to find in 18-year-olds, right? They're too busy being teenagers, acting spoiled, etc. And they're two completely contrasting normals, right? They're two completely, over there it's normal for a 10, 11, 12-year-old to have that much responsibility and to respond to it and thrive in it, right? And some people might look at that and think, he or she is far too young to have so much responsibility. They should be enjoying their life and spending their time playing and so on. And on the other hand, you have the contrast, which is the child has reached 16, 17. They behave like a spoiled brat. They don't take responsibility for anything. They instead of taking responsibility for their siblings, they're picking on them and making their life difficult. It's difficult for parents to get them to listen to them rather than them easing their parents' load. And basically, there's a massive difference. They're misbehaving in school, etc., etc. So here, essentially, the idea of the age of responsibility, or bulugh, is in the Islamic juristic tradition, if you like, looking at the Quran and the Sunnah, arriving at an understanding that kind of mediates between these extremes and says, well, at this age, the vast majority of children should be able to make decisions for themselves, and it is correct and fair to deem them to be accountable for their actions, and therefore for all obligations to fall upon them. Even though they may remain under their guardians and there may be still much more learning left to do, much more nurturing left to do, but they have reached an age of responsibility, which means two things, right? Mediating between these different extremes therefore means two things. Number one, we now understand that, that from 7 onwards, the process of education begins and the preparation for adulthood begins. And then at the age at which they become responsible, which we'll talk about in a minute. I'm still not saying what age that is yet necessarily, but the age at which they become responsible, they should, by then they should understand, right, that they're becoming responsible adults, and therefore maturity should be nurtured in them, even though it's very much possible that in another part in the world that many children don't show that level of maturity, not because they aren't capable, but because they just weren't nurtured to accept responsibility. It's a very, very big, it's a very important point. So essentially what the Sharia is telling us is, don't just wait for it to happen, because it won't. And eventually it will happen very, very late if you don't nurture it, but rather nurture it so that they are ready for it by this stage. And that stage isn't a fixed age necessarily. There are minimum and maximum limits, if you like. But it's really something that parents have to be aware of and start to prepare children early on, from the age of discernment and upwards. They prepare them for it, knowing that it could happen within 2 or 3 years. It could happen at any stage. So the parents have to take the responsibility to prepare them for it well in advance, right? And that preparation begins from the age of discernment, from the age of 7, anticipating that, as we'll see, as early as 9, a girl may actually reach the official stage of maturity. A boy as early as 12 can reach the official stage of maturity. Now that's quite early. That's at the minimum end. But that does not mean, and this is where my example of the third world comes in, that it doesn't mean that they become mature and they are not capable. They are very much capable if they are normal children, but often children demonstrate an incapacity, not because they are in fact incapable, but actually because they have not been nurtured in a way that teaches them responsibility early on. Right? It's very, very important to understand this. And sometimes there is too much of the kind of they have to play and enjoy life at this stage, etc., etc. It's fair enough, and they should, but there's no reason why they can't also learn responsibility at the same time. And it is extremely important that their education achieves a balance between continuing their childhood through the age of discernment to them actually becoming responsible, but not so much that their responsibility doesn't grow and develop, but rather that there is a balance between the two, and the two things grow together. Partly because they actually understand that there's going to come a time soon when they are deemed to be accountable for their actions, in the akhirah in particular, but also in the dunya. I mean, in the dunya, it obviously, it's different legal systems at different ages. Everybody knows that there is a certain responsibility that arrives upon a child at the age of 16. But too often in Western culture, young people look forward to these to these milestones in their life, 16, 18, for all the wrong reasons. It's so that they can enjoy certain freedoms. They can move away from home. They can do things that they were unable to do before. That is a childlike attitude towards responsibility, towards adulthood, right? It's like, I want to be more of a child, but I'm not being allowed to while I'm under my parents. Or I can't wait until I'm 18 so that I can be more irresponsible. That betrays and demonstrates a fundamental flaw in the manner in which children are nurtured in the West. There's something fundamentally broken there. Okay. Now, this is not a course about upbringing and nurturing children and parenting. But these are important things to basically recognize. Whether you are a young person who's watching this video at the age of 16, 17, 15, 14, whatever, or whether you are an adult who has children who are going to go through these stages in the future, or perhaps are in one of these stages now. It's important. Responsibility is responsibility, and it can begin as early as 9 for young girls and as early as 12 for boys, right? And then there is a kind of maximum end, there is a kind of deadline, which is 15, right? That no matter what, when you reach 15, you are mature. You are accountable in the akhirah. You do something wrong in the akhirah, it's being written in your book of deeds in the akhirah. And that responsibility must be reflected in your attitude in the dunya here, right? So that you show that responsibility and you grow into that responsibility before you reach that age. Okay? So that's for young people themselves to consider, right? For adults, for parents, for guardians, it's your job to make sure that the young people learn these lessons and they learn responsibility without overburdening them, without breaking them with too much responsibility too early, but striking a balance between the requirements of childhood and the requirements of play, etc., but also giving them those lessons to make sure that by the time they are beginning to show the physical signs of maturity, right? They have all of the know-how. They've learned all of the lessons, right? And they have demonstrated responsibility in various ways, and it's been put to the test in various ways, right? This is crucial. Okay, so let's now read this rather long paragraph here. So this falls upon a young person when he/she is intelligent and mature. This is the key. The key really is intelligence and maturity. At this point, he/she, well, before I continue, so the intelligence and maturity is the key. And but the reason why we try to fix it, and the reason why the fuqaha try to come up with some sort of guidance as to what's the minimum, what is the minimum age for it, and what is the point at which it is confirmed, is because without fixing things in this manner, it isn't possible to have a law. It's not possible to have a legal system. It isn't possible. Decisions must be made about these things, but really these decisions are based on a kind of law of average. It's like, okay, on average, there's two things actually they consider. Number one, what guidance does the Quran and the Sunnah provide about it? Number one. Number two, how is this reflective of the kind of the average age, right? And it's because there's a certain kind of subtlety and flexibility in perhaps what the texts have to say, what the Quran and the Sunnah have to say about this, and as well as this question of the intelligence being the key factor. Because of this, you may see some difference of opinion among the scholars, right, about it. So at this point, he/she is able to enter into contracts without being dependent upon or subject to the permission of others, meaning that, if they were to enter into a contract, for example, and it became a dispute, things would be binding upon them, because they would be, by this stage, they should know that there is a responsibility that there is a responsibility that falls on their shoulders when they enter into transactions, right? Their word is binding, and so on. In terms of religious duties, the articles of faith, the 5 pillars of Islam, all become incumbent, right? So all of the fara'id, whatever's fard is now fard, whatever's wajib is now wajib, and so on. As do other responsibilities such as enjoining good and forbidding evil. As you know, that is a duty upon the Muslim, that with all of its nuance, basically becomes obligatory upon children. So therefore naturally it becomes necessary for them to have learned that, right, from the age of discernment onwards, for that to become something that they learn, right, with all of its subtlety and variety and so on. These are things that they must learn, not necessarily in a kind of instructive way through books and so on, although that would complement their learning, but more kind of practically by way of example. It's important that now they should be exposed to people who to different forms of enjoining good and forbidding evil and so on. Similarly, jihad in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at this point becomes obligatory, even though, for example, the ruler may decide that no, you're too small, you're not strong enough, etc., etc. But the obligation is there. The obligation is there from the Shari'i point of view, in that if that responsibility was laid upon them, then it would be valid, right? Before that, they would be deemed too young. Similarly, the duty to respect the sanctity of the wealth, lives, and honors of others, right? So, for example, by now they should understand that I can't in any way infringe on the sanctity of somebody else's wealth. I can't steal, for example. I can't take things. I can't possess what someone else is, and so on. I can't take things without permission. These are all things that become obligatory upon them. And were they to commit violations in this domain, having reached the age of responsibility, would imply that the subsequent punishments, if you like, or sanctions would apply upon them. Same thing goes for respecting the sanctity of life, which is to do with making, not hurting other people physically, not harming them, not doing any kind of bodily harm to them. Similarly, respecting the honor of other people, which means that not defaming them, not gossiping against them, not accusing them falsely, etc., etc. And refraining from all things haram and prohibited in the Sharia. So this goes without saying, but must be spelled out. So at this stage, they can't commit haram. So this is where sometimes parents can be really, really relaxed with children, and the habit of doing things that are actually impermissible in the Sharia continues unabated until it gets to a stage where actually the haram becomes a habit, and the child can't let go. They're now 16, 17, and they can't let go of these things because it's been tolerated for so long by their parents. So that's why it's a big responsibility to nurture children in a way that they never develop a taste for the haram, or never become accustomed to the haram. For all of this, he or she, boy, girl, is accountable in the dunya and in the akhirah. This is ultimately the lesson that needs to be repeated to children from the age of discernment, that you're coming to an age where on the day of judgment you'll be asked about your actions. It's no longer, the age of innocence is gone, right? When whatever you do is hadar, is disregarded as something that a child has done, right? And it's important that children are made aware that this time is coming, and that also it isn't something that, it's not our job to make them fear that, right, as parents, but and young people shouldn't fear that, but rather it should be something that they look forward to, right? Because with it there also come certain privileges as well, but they're made to look forward to it because the idea of responsibility is and the idea of adulthood is something that also comes with independence, right? And independence should not be equated with freedom and the ability to do whatever one wants. But the independence is about being able to make decisions that are your own, all right? And that may result in certain freedoms and so on, but that is balanced by all of the responsibilities that come with adulthood. And this, it's important for young people to understand this, and for parents to basically make them understand this. It's like, they all go through it, but it's important that it's kind of discussed within Islamic narrative. Young people, but practically they realize primary school was easier, secondary school is getting harder, right? Suddenly life goes through these changes. And these are some of the things that you can rely on to ensure that they know that regardless of how you look at life, whether it's religion, or whether it's your education at school, whether it's your Islamic education, etc., these processes are normal. These transitions through different stages of life are normal. Okay, so it's just a matter of making sure that they understand it well enough so that they understand that part of that responsibility to act according to a certain morality, that they understand spiritual responsibility, they understand the responsibility of being a person of good character, and so on. Okay, so continuing on, a young person officially reaches this stage by the manifestation of one of the natural signs of maturity, which is called bulugh. The idea of the maturity is known as bulugh in Arabic. These natural signs of maturity are things like a boy starting to have wet dreams involving ejaculation. And although one might think, oh, why did we have to mention that detail? Well, it's technical in the sense that it's possible for a young person to have, nowadays in particular, to have dreams of a sexual experience, but it wouldn't count as a wet dream, and which then consequently becomes an indicator of maturity, unless it is unless ejaculation is involved. And of course, again, remember, we're talking about ultimately this is a sign of the fact that they reached the age of responsibility, the level of intelligence, etc. But one of the things that ejaculation indicates is the fact that they are ready for biologically ready for that stage in maturity and adulthood that basically makes it physically possible, biologically possible for them to have children, right? And that is a factor. Biologically speaking, ejaculation is a requirement in that consideration, as is, for example, the next point, a girl commencing her menstrual cycle, which of course is the sign that she can also have children, and therefore that is a biological indicator of maturity, which for the most part would and should correspond with and coincide with intellectual maturity. Okay, again, there are exceptions, and when there are exceptions, the Sharia rulings are adjusted. But for example, in special needs cases and so on. But for the most part, this is the norm, and children who are who are normal in terms of their intelligence and so on, and their normality is observed from childhood, should be nurtured towards responsibility by this stage. Okay, whether that stage is, at 11 or 12 or 13, it doesn't matter. But the process of making sure that they've reached that stage of nurturing should happen regardless. Okay. Similarly, if, for example, if circumstances were such that there was no other sign other than it just so happens that the girl became pregnant, for example, then that too would be a confirmation of the fact that that she's reached maturity, physical maturity. If no signs manifest, then at the completion of 15 years for boys and girls. So it may be that a girl's menstruation doesn't begin, a boy doesn't have wet dreams, etc., doesn't have any of the the biological signs. Starting to have wet dreams being a crucial one. None of that basically happens. Then and it's not possible to physically confirm a young person's maturity. Then at the age of 15, and I guess, and this is not necessarily a fatwa or a ruling, but one of the things that knowing the age helps us do is kind of arrive at a conclusive point at which we can say, okay, there may have been a question mark over a young person's maturity because they hadn't physically matured, or perhaps they had physically matured but physically matured really, really early, and their gradual growth into maturity was spread over a longer period of time. In those kind of situations, knowing that 15 years is the completion of 15 years is the time, helps everybody to kind of put a pin on it and say, right, this is it. Right, from this stage on, you are mature. Salah is obligatory. You can't miss your salah, etc., etc. Although in all normal cases, what should be happening is all of the things that would become obligatory upon a young person at the age of 15 or at maturity, they should already be accustomed to and used to and already be doing before that. Okay, so a good example is prayer. Start teaching them prayer and telling them to pray from the age of 7. By the age of 10, if they don't pray, there should be consequences and there should be sanctions, etc., punishment, etc. Because by then, prayer has already become a habit. So that even if they were to mature early, they're already praying. Okay, these signs are seen as indicators of maturity and intelligence, and a mature person is known as baligh, just so that you know the Arabic term. You may have heard it already. So a baligh boy is baligh, and a baligh girl is baligha, basically, if you want to really be particular in terms of the Arabic and the grammar. Okay, the minimum age of maturity is regarded as 9 years for girls and 12 years for boys, and there is a distinction. Most observations show that girls tend to mature younger. And also biologically speaking, girls there's more frequent examples of girls starting to menstruate as young as 9, as opposed to and boys kind of, if they do have start to have wet dreams, etc. early, then it's usually kind of around the 12 year mark, and rarely before that. So it's been set as 9 and 12 respectively. If menstruation or wet dreams begin before this age, they are not mature. So again, setting an age allows in the jurisprudence, in the law, for to end up making conclusions such as this, right? So 9 is the minimum, even if it is physically possible. And examples can be found of somebody starting menstruation before 9, a boy having wet dreams before 12. But now that the law has been set, the fiqh has determined that 9 is the minimum age, and we've concluded that if the signs are manifest before that, then they won't count. Okay. As maturity draws close and young people enter adolescence, there are other signs that point to the proximity of maturity, right? Such as hair growth under the armpits and around the private parts, especially thick hair. So initially what happens is that there's thin hair, right? It's thin and soft hair. And then as they get closer and as they get more into adolescence and get closer towards physical maturity, the hair thickens. All right. And, their sexual organs grow. Boys end up with start to get facial hair. That's an indicator that they've reached adolescence. Girls start to grow breasts. They start to get that teenager smell. There's body odor. Sometimes there's other signs, spots and things like that. So these are all indicators, right, that they're in adolescence now. They're going to mature at any stage. And I would emphasize again that by the time they reach by the time all of these types of signs have manifested, in my opinion, they should already know. They should already know that I have these signs because I'm reaching maturity, because those conversations have been had and they've studied these issues. The reason why I felt compelled to focus on this chapter and cover it in detail and gather all the scattered material on it is because I have seen too much evidence of this being neglected, and young people going all the way into maturity, starting to pray and fulfill religious obligations, not knowing what the rules are, not knowing when they actually became mature, and not knowing what they're meant to do. So, for example, like knowing that that a girl, once her menstruation begins, once a cycle is completed, she has to take a bath to become pure. And a boy, if it has a wet dream, which is definitely going to happen. Like, I have to talk about it because these are not, why do we have to talk about these things? We have to talk about these things because they are certainties in life. But what's happening is parents are taking this kind of attitude, I'm not going to be the one to talk to my son about this. I'm not going to be the one to talk to my daughter about this. They'll learn it from school. They learn it from somewhere. And somehow they fall through the gap, or when they do learn it, they're not paying attention, etc., etc. What you end up with is young people not knowing that a boy not knowing that when I've had a wet dream, I have to take a shower to become pure so that my salah is valid. So they pray. So the mom and dad are telling them to pray because that is something they feel they can do. But the boy isn't pure. Girls had her menstruation. She's not taking a bath, or isn't doing the ritual bath properly. Mum says, go and take a shower, right? Your menstruation is over, but hasn't taken the time to teach her the rules of a ritual bath, because it's not just about pouring water over yourself. There are specific steps to follow. So these are the issues, and that's why it's extremely important that this process is something that parents learn, right? And young people also learn for themselves. And this is an open conversation so that when the time comes, they're fully prepared. They know what to do. And when salah is an obligation upon them, it's valid because they have wudu, because they're in a pure state. Otherwise, because if they didn't know these things and if they hadn't been taught these things, they wouldn't be in a pure state. I heard of an example of a boy who from physical maturity all the way till 18 had been praying 4 years of salah, right? But nobody told him that after having a wet dream, he needed to take a bath. He needed to take a ritual bath, not just a shower, but a ritual bath with everything that's involved in it, as we will study later on. And he'd prayed for 4 years, and without a shadow of a doubt, probably the vast majority of those prayers weren't valid. Allah will forgive him. But there is a massive breakdown of education here, breakdown of parenting here, breakdown of teaching and instruction in the madrasa and in the masjid that has happened over here that has resulted in this. Right? I was talking to my father about it, and he goes to tabligh and is involved in kind of tabligh da'wah work and so on. And he said that he came across young people. He's come across young people who are as old as 25 who learn during their time in tabligh or during the time in da'wah that they're actually meant to take a bath, after certain physical things like wet dreams and so on, or after sexual intercourse and things like that. And they didn't know, right? And they realize it now at this stage, right? But they were, even if they weren't praying 5 times a day, Allah forbid it, right? If they weren't praying 5 times a day, they're praying Jumu'ah, they're praying Eid, etc. There's implications on their fasting, there's implications on Umrah and Hajj, and on all of these things. All of this is affected. There's implications on whether it's permissible for them to recite the Quran or not, touch the Quran or not, all of these things, right? So it's pretty serious, this stuff. Okay, so that's why it's extremely important. So it is important that young people are made aware of these things, and so that they are prepared for what is to come. Okay, inshallah. Right. Continuing on this, parents must begin by teaching children prayer and other religious duties from the age of 7. This should intensify from the age of 10 with disciplinary action if necessary, and become their normal routine so that they are already habitually acting upon the teachings of the Sharia long before they are mature. And when we say teachings of the Sharia, we're talking about the whole lot. So we're talking about everything mentioned over here, right? Everything mentioned over here, on this slide, right? Here we are. So the articles of faith, the 5 pillars of Islam, enjoining good, forbidding evil, jihad in the way of Allah, respecting the sanctity of wealth, lives, and honors of others, refraining from all things haram and prohibited in the Sharia for all, etc. And the fact that all of they will be accountable in the hereafter, conversations about death and accountability in the akhirah. All of these things become necessary, right? Like long before they actually become mature, so that by maturity, this stuff is well ingrained and things that are practical, they're already doing. Okay. Obviously, there's in our communities, there is a process in place for this, but in my opinion, it's not effective, and parents must oversee it. Ultimately, it's your responsibility as a parent, for example. And young people, wherever they learn it from, they must learn it from somewhere. If they don't learn it in the masjid, then their learning has to be backed up. You learn when you learn maths, for example, right? It's a key subject. When you learn math, you learn certain things in key stage 1 that are consolidated in key stage 2 and in key stage 3. They're repeated again and again and again until they're fully consolidated, right? And then sometimes what you learn in GCSE is repeated at A level. What you learn at A level is repeated at degree, right? But for some reason, we have this sense that when it comes to aspects of Islamic education, if a child learns prayer at 7, then that's it. Somehow they know it for the rest of their life. Absolutely not. They forget 80-90% of it. It has to be repeated and consolidated, and they have to learn it again at a different stage of their life. If they've started learning it at 7, then they must review it again at 8 or 9 or 10, and review it again at 11, 12, 13, and so on. This has to happen with all of these things, and that doesn't happen. Right? They learn it within the madrasa. It has to be repeated with the parents. Some of it has to be formal. Some of it has to be informal. Some of it theoretical. Some of it practical. All of this has to happen. Okay. They must be taught well in advance the rules of purification and personal hygiene, so that they are aware of what they must do to maintain a state of purity and deal with some of the biological changes that their bodies are undergoing. Like what's going on? There's hair growing and there's these things happening. Like, it can be quite, these things can be quite traumatic if nobody's talking to them about it, and they haven't, and Even worse if they're being exposed to misinformation from other sources, from the internet, from friends, because their parents have left that void. Okay. Similarly, they must be taught the meaning of accountability before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the meaning of responsibility towards and for others. So there's, like, for example, you have responsibilities towards somebody in terms of obligations that are due for them, but also there are responsibility. There is also being responsible for someone, right? Learning to care for others, learning to protect others, learning to caring for parents, birrul walidain, for example, doing the khidmah of parents, taking care of younger siblings. This is all part of the learning process in young people. Responsibilities towards rights and responsibilities, right, from and towards fellow Muslims, neighbors, these kind of things. And the responsibility of being a Muslim, a Muslim, an example of Islam, is a significant part. Young people should learn early on, right? Wherever we live, there is a circumstance. Islam has a certain position, right? And we have to, and we are an example of Islam. And because of because this lesson isn't taught well to our young people, the opposite is often true. In inner cities where Muslims are congregated, where there's high Muslim populations, young people are actually a very bad example of Islam. All right, why is this happening? It's because of a lack of education. It's because everything that we're discussing here isn't happening. All right, it's not by accident. All right, and it's not just about inner city realities and poverty. These are all factors, of course. I don't deny them, but a lot of it is to do with education. There are many young people from religious families who are doing perfectly well, even though they're living in overcrowding, living in the inner city, have less opportunities than others, etc., etc. However, they're not having some of the problems that other kids are having, and it's to do with the way they're brought up. It's to do with the education that they receive. Further responsibilities of marriage, parenthood, and family, kinship, community, and livelihood must all be taught to them. All children must know at a certain stage that, like, your children today, tomorrow you're going to be parents, and you have to learn these responsibilities. Responsibility towards family, knowing relatives. Like, young people nowadays, they don't know who their relatives are. They don't know what different relationships mean. Right? They know the word, but they don't know what that means. Parents have to be alert to this, and these conversations have to happen repeatedly, so that they know who is a maternal aunt, who is a paternal aunt, right? And what these relationships mean, and how is a cousin related to related to them, or how and why is it that some uncles are closer and other uncles are not? Some aunts that we see regularly, others we don't see regularly, because there's differences. There's different levels of kinship, and there's relationships by blood have different levels, and so on. All of this stuff is important. Okay, all of this must be done through a gradual process of character development, because knowing about kinship isn't just about knowing what relationships are, but it's also about knowing. It's about knowing the meanings of compassion. It's about the meanings of loyalty, the meaning of responsibility, meanings of love, the meaning of generosity, etc., etc. These are all things that have to be part of the package, so that their character develops with what they learn. Okay, inshallah. So that's the end of our discussion about responsibility and age of accountability. These are all things that basically pretty much summarize the main issues around age of responsibility, and when young people become baligh, or become mature, responsible, accountable for their actions, and so on. And in keeping it relevant to us, basically that's when Salah becomes fard. Okay, so it goes through this process of incomplete accountability, the age of discernment, followed by when they reach bulugh, which isn't the same for everyone when it comes to the physical signs, but for everybody it's the age of 15 if the physical signs do not manifest. Okay, inshallah. Now, so I want to move on to the whole conversation around um, the signs of puberty and some of the other aspects of hygiene that I wanted to talk about over and above the conversation we've had so far, and the discussion we've had so far about purification and purity. And these are very well summarized in a hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam about under the heading of the Sunan al-Fitra or the Khisal al-Fitra. Both words are used, meaning the what you might call the norms of human nature, right? So this covers a lot of the things that are kind of important with regards to, or the essential norms with regards to personal hygiene that also have a strong overlap with the whole conversation around puberty, inshallah. Okay, so let's go through that. So the Sunan al-Fitra. So related to puberty and personal hygiene are a set of teachings known as the Sunan al-Fitra, or norms of human nature. These are also known as the Sunan, or norms and teachings of Ibrahim alayhi salam, and are thus believed to be common among the Abrahamic faiths. Okay, so it's understood that these were practiced by Ibrahim alayhi salam himself, and then passed on, and then all of the people who followed his millah, or his way, the Abrahamic faiths as we know them, practiced these things as their Sunan. And they continue on in the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the hadith is narrated by Bukhari and Muslim, and it goes like this: 10 things are from the norms of nature. Number 1, trimming the mustache. Number 2, letting the beard grow. Number 3, using the toothstick known as the siwak or the miswak. Number 4, rinsing the nose with water by drawing water in, i.e. snuffing the water up, basically. Or pushing it up, or however you want to achieve it. Number 5, clipping the nails. Number 6, washing the knuckles and finger joints. Number 7, plucking the hair under the armpits. Number 8, shaving the pubic hair. Number 9, using water to clean one's private parts after urination. And then in the hadith it says that the narrator mentioned that he had forgotten the 10th, unless it is rinsing the mouth, not as mother. And that is pretty much what the ulama believe it is, that the 10th one is rinsing the mouth. And I want to very quickly, some of these are self-explanatory, but I want to very quickly go through each one. Some aspects, some things are important to understand about these. So firstly, clipping or trimming the mustache. The sunnah is to shorten the mustache. And this sunnah is transmitted from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in conjunction with the command to grow the beard, right? The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, shorten the mustache, lengthen and grow the beard, right? So, in terms of shortening the mustache, it can be done by trimming the edges, so that the lips become visible. So the mustache kind of has growth, but the kind of the edges are trimmed so that it never grows over the lips. Alternatively, it can be completely lightened and trimmed down and completely shortened. Shaving the mustache is permissible in the Hanafi madhab. Other imams say that shaving isn't what's intended in the sunnah, and the mustache shouldn't be shaved, but it can be trimmed all the way down, which is why it's based really on this opinion of the fuqaha, that you see that some people, they insist on trimming it all the way down with a trimmer or with scissors or something like that, but wouldn't touch a blade to it. It's because some of the fuqaha basically don't allow it. In the Hanafi madhab, the intent is to keep it trimmed down, and as such, shaving achieves that, and therefore it is permissible to shave it. The mustache should not be allowed to grow over the lip, and this is makruh. Some of the fuqaha have specifically stated that it is makruh for this, and there's good reasons for it. Hygiene-related reasons, etc. It interferes with food and so forth. So mustache should not be allowed to grow over the upper lip. For the most part, it seems as though managing the mustache, managing its length and thickness, and trimming it even all the way down, is something that is one of the sunnahs of human nature. And also the Prophet ﷺ in one hadith where he said, trim the mustache, lengthen the beard, go khaliful majus. He said do the opposite of what the Magians do. This hadith is just down here. We're going to read it now, inshallah. And the Magians used to keep basically copious moustaches. Okay, number 2 is growing the beard. In the Islamic tradition, the beard is considered a mark of beauty in men, and traditionally this was the norm. Most cultures, men kept beards. We're seeing a bit of a resurgence of it in contemporary fashion, but it is something that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam did command men to keep, right? And so for that reason, it is regarded as as a bare minimum, as sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam expressly commanded it, as I mentioned in the hadith, which I've already read out before. It is haram according to the Malikis and Hanbalis, or makruh tahrimi according to the Hanafis, or makruh tanzihi according to the Shafi'is, to trim the beard below a fistful, or to basically to take from its volume. The idea, I suppose, because there's no other evidence of a stated length other than the narrations from Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu anhuma, that report that he himself trimmed his beard past a fistful. I think mine is probably exactly that right now, so a little bit coming out of my fist there, right? So I pretty much keep it exactly that length. It's because of that the scholars tend to basically stick to the idea of the fistful, because there's no evidence of anything else as far as length is concerned. But it's also because there is not anything else. The Shafi'is, for example, say that it's makruh tanzihi to trim it down, and I would say that the minimum that a person should do is make sure that to fulfill the strong sunnah, or even the wujub, that their beard should be visible and it should be copious. All right, and if you want a length, then the fistful is the length. That's pretty much all of the fuqaha, mention as far as giving a kind of a measure for people to know how far to cut and how long to keep. Some fuqaha discourage growing the beard too far beyond the length of a fistful. Others hold the view that a copious beard is fine. A minority view even is that it shouldn't be trimmed at all, which in my opinion is impractical, but that view also exists. But the most important thing is that all of the fuqaha, there's pretty much consensus that it is haram to shave the beard, because of the fact that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam emphasized it so strongly. Okay, so that's something for men to keep into consideration as far as this particular sunnah is concerned. Some of the fuqaha and many of my teachers have advised that it is important to keep the beard neat and tidy. I've specifically read that view from people like Imam Abu Yusuf in some of the Hanafi texts, and the idea is that you basically keep your beard trimmed based upon how it is. Some people, their beard grows so copiously that they can have a fist length on all sides, and then as they trim it, it looks nice and tidy. Other people, it grows, like for example, people who come from my background, Bangladeshis and people like that, we tend to have less thick beards, right? And sometimes our beards grow quite healthily on the chin, but not so much on the side, and so on. So therefore, tidying a beard like that up will mean that not all of it is a fist length. But in general, basically, it is important to keep the beard looking tidy and making sure that the beard looks good, right? And a general kind of encouragement for that comes from the hadith, Inna Allah Jamilun Yuhibbul Jamal, Allah is beautiful and loves beauty. And from the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Man kana lahu sha'r falyukrimhu, and of course, if you just let it grow and it's all over the place, and a person looks kind of disheveled, and the beard looks disheveled and messy all the time, this is not the intent of the Sunnah or the Sharia, and therefore people who have beards should take care of them and keep them clean and tidy, smelling good, looking good. All right. Moving on, number 3 is using the toothstick or the siwak. Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu reported that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Were it not that I might burden my people, I would have ordered them to use the siwak," right, or the toothstick, at every time of the prayer, And in another narration, he said in every ablution. The Hanafis take the view that it's that it should be, that it's the sunnah is at every ablution. Others say it's at every salah. Others say it's both. You should do it at ablution. You should do it at salah as well. If you're not praying straight after your ablution, for example. In another hadith, he said using the toothstick cleans the mouth and pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And based on these hadith, using the siwak, in all of the different meanings that I'm going to explain now, basically is an emphasized sunnah, right? And it would be an emphasized sunnah if a person did it whilst maintaining good oral hygiene. I think the question of poor oral hygiene would fall into the category of the haram and the makruh tahrimi because of the fact that it results in harm and gum disease. So it's important to recognize from a Sharia point of view that in saying something is a sunnah does not always imply that its opposite is somehow less emphasized, meaning a person doesn't brush their teeth, for example, and doesn't use the siwak. It is only violating a sunnah is not a correct conclusion, because if the opposite results in harm, it results in gum disease, it results in unsightly teeth, decaying teeth, etc., then that would go down as a haram because it is causing harm to a person. All right, and therefore, I suppose a minimum oral hygiene in taking care of one's teeth and one's mouth is essential, and the sunnah method for it is what the toothstick and things like that demonstrate. They demonstrate that the Anbiya from Ibrahim alayhi salam onwards, this was how in their tradition they maintained oral hygiene. All right, and you'll see that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's practice of it goes over and above just keeping your teeth clean. It's over and above. The purpose is to keep the teeth and mouth clean. The Prophet ﷺ was seen making a retching sound while brushing, indicating that he brushed his tongue, because that's the reaction when you brush your tongue, it makes you retch. And it's also evidence that he brushed vigorously. So basically, he was intent on cleaning his teeth, not just kind of wiping the teeth over once with a toothstick, like sometimes you see people do. And also the times at which the Prophet ﷺ does it also indicates this. Some scholars take the view that the sunnah of siwak, meaning that although the Prophet ﷺ used that particular stick from a particular tree, that kind of when you open it up, when you get rid of the bark and open it up, it ends up like a brush. It has these fibers that you can use like a brush. Although often people think of that specifically to be the sunnah, actually. Many scholars articulate, these classical scholars and contemporary scholars, that the purpose really isn't the stick, but the purpose is cleaning, keeping the teeth clean, right? And because that is the purpose, keeping it clean with any other instrument would fulfill the sunnah, right? So, for example, therefore, a person who is using a toothbrush is fulfilling the sunnah of the siwak, right? Which actually is really useful to know, because it means that when you brush your teeth in the morning, if you have that in your mind, then you're getting the reward of using the siwak, which of course cleans the mouth and pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And not knowing this, it would never occur to you to think that you're doing the siwak when you brush your teeth in the morning, for example, and therefore no intention, no reward. Right. Whereas now, if you have that intention that I'm fulfilling the sunnah and I'm doing this out to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then the rewards basically pile on. Other ulama say they would acknowledge that keeping oral hygiene is sunnah, but they would say that additionally to do it with the toothstick is specifically a sunnah, and therefore the full sunnah is not being fulfilled if a person uses a brush. That's another opinion. So there are two elements to it, basically, two aspects to it. The minimum is oral hygiene. That fulfills an aspect of the sunnah. And according to some ulama, that completely fulfills the sunnah. And therefore, for example, when the Prophet ﷺ says, use the brush before at wudu and before every salah, if a person pulled out a toothbrush and did it, according to these ulama, the sunnah would be fulfilled. I think here, this is where it's at this point that the second opinion actually adds its value, because it's actually not very practical to be using your brush in so frequently, because it would actually wear out your gums. And for frequent use, the siwak, the toothstick, is actually a much more suitable instrument. So therefore, probably what is advisable to do is to use something strong and like the toothbrush, and you with the toothpaste, etc., in the morning and before going to bed, when you probably need to clean the most, as part of your oral hygiene. And then siwak is something that you do additionally for all of the other frequent times in which it is sunnah to basically brush, simply because it's impractical to use a toothbrush in that way. And if you were able to do that, then you'd be fulfilling the sunnah completely and full, according to all of the opinions that exist on the matter. In any case, the minimum is oral hygiene, and one may go further and also use a siwak specifically with the intention of emulating the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But the way I just explained it is a good way to basically think of the issue. All right. If we continue on, when to brush, and the reason why this point is being mentioned here is because some of the ahadith point out that the Prophet ﷺ made a point to brush at certain times. We already know two of them, wudu and salah. There are others, and the fuqaha basically also discuss this quite deliberately and quite abundantly. When are the times that a person should brush? And from this, it becomes clear what they understood the purpose of the siwak to be. Right? It's very important, and from a oral hygiene point of view, it's extremely important to understand this. Right? So the scholars have mentioned the following times. Before wudu, according to the Hanafis, is the better time, especially because according to Hanafi madhab, if you bleed from your gums, your wudu can break, and therefore it is better not to do siwak again before salah, after you've made wudu, in case you bleed from the gums, and therefore it's better. Some ulama say that if there's been a gap between your wudu and your salah, then it's sunnah to do the siwak before the salah. That has been clarified by some ulama. In the Hanafis, you'd have to do it gently to make sure you don't bleed from the teeth. According to some fuqaha, bleeding doesn't break wudu, and therefore, it's not an issue for them. But it's something to basically be mindful of. And so that's how you understand the whole issue of before wudu or before salah. After eating is another time. Before and after sleep, for obvious reasons. After lengthy conversation and lengthy silence, because the mouth, one's breath becomes stale usually after this. Lengthy hunger or thirst, again, because there's a smell. The smell of hunger takes over the mouth, and in general, whenever one feels that toothbrushing is needed because one's mouth has become stale and smelly. Aisha radiallahu anha said the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to use brush before entering his house, because he wanted to appear to his family without foul breath and with a fresh mouth and so on. Brushing with a siwak, not with toothpaste, is recommended for both fasting and non-fasting persons. Just added that just in case anybody is wondering. But toothpaste is not recommended. One shouldn't use toothpaste when fasting, basically. Right. Before rinsing the nose with water, this is known as istinshaq. Rinsing inside. Basically, what it means is you rinse the inside of your nose with water. So by either drawing water in, so you water in your hand and slightly snuff it in. It can be uncomfortable sometimes and make your eyes teary, but you got to get comfortable with a certain. Basically, the idea is to get to the upper end of the nose, and deep within the nose, and then basically do something called istinthar, which is basically blowing it out. And this cleans it's like a deep cleanse, a deep rinse of the nose. So this is istinshaq. And istinshaq is one of the sunan of fitrah. And if you're not comfortable snuffing it in, then what I found useful and what I tend to do is, if you push it up, if you take water in the palm of your hand, hold it to your nose and push it up, then you achieve the same effect. The water kind of goes up, and it doesn't cause any kind of discomfort. However, here we're not talking about istinshaq, or we're not talking about rinsing the mouth as part of wudu. Yes, as part of wudu, it is of course a sunnah, but this is an independent sunnah, right? So when we talk about istinshaq as one of the sunan al-fitra, we're talking about it both in wudu as well as independent of wudu, right? That whenever istinshaq is something that is sunnah, whenever a person needs to clean his nose, they should do istinshaq, i.e. snap up the water a little bit or push the water up a little bit, and then basically clean one's nose or rinse it out. Number 5, clipping the nails of the hands and the feet, an obvious one. It doesn't need explaining, but again, the Prophet ﷺ taught this as part of personal hygiene. For some bizarre reason, though, based on contemporary fashion, it's actually important to state this, because you'd think people would cut their nails, right? But no, some people want to grow them. So it's an agreed upon sunnah for men and women. The purpose is hygiene and to ensure it is easy to get water under the nails during purification. It is recommended to trim the nails every Friday, and makruh tahrimi to leave them for more than 40 nights. That's a long time for nails, right? So that doesn't mean that it's okay to keep growing them. It just means that you've actually done, that's just a measure that shows that you've gone too far, right? But normally what is expected is that it's done weekly, right? On a Friday, perhaps. It would be completely impermissible. The reason why they mention Friday is because Friday, ghusl, etc., is sunnah, preparation for Friday, and therefore that's a good time to do your hygiene rituals, trimming the moustache, cutting your nails, etc. It would be completely impermissible to let them grow to a point that water is obstructed during wudu, regardless of time elapsed. So if you've got really tight nails, when they grow, it's difficult to get water to the skin under them, etc., and they grew that much within a week or 2 weeks, then it becomes obligatory upon you to trim them down. The whole question of 40 nights, etc., it becomes irrelevant. All right. You've done some painting, or you were doing some gluing or something, and some paint got under your nails. You got to cut it and clean under there immediately. It's just that making sure that your wudu is safe, right, and your salah is safe. It remains a separate obligation in any case. These rulings are for men and women. Important to point out, of course, because women should be cautious about keeping long nails for fashion, because it is fashionable. Kind of weird and senseless, right? Not even attractive, actually, but don't know why that it's fashionable to keep long nails, right? It's kind of ridiculous. But anyway, there you go. That's Western fashion for you. The women and women's fashion is not exempt from the sunnah, right? So therefore, that is a sunnah that one should not fulfill. And in fact, the fuqaha say that when trimming the nails, it's good to trim them all the way down. So you can't keep like 3 millimeters and then trim it down and say, oh, I am trimming it down, because really the sunnah isn't actually being fulfilled. The same applies if you keep long nails and you keep them clean, right? And you've got nice healthy nails, and the water, you take care to get the water underneath. You're still going against the sunnah, even though your wudu, etc., is being done, right? The sunnah is to keep is to clip the nails. It's supposed to have to do it every week, and it's makruh to keep it beyond 40 days. And people should make sure that their practice is within that, okay, or their habit rather is within that. Number 6, washing the knuckles and finger joints. Straightforward. Some people have really thick skin and hard skin, especially if you do lots of manual labor and so on. These areas get cracked and they get heavily creased, and you can get dirt there, and therefore it's good to keep these clean. Number 7, plucking or shaving under the armpits. The sunnah is to pull out the hair. Well, basically the hadith mentions natful ibt, i.e. plucking the armpits, which if you can do it right from the outset, actually becomes something that's quite easy to do. But if you've started shaving and got into the habit of shaving, then the roots tend to harden, and it's much, much harder to pluck and more painful to pluck. So plucking is actually quite a good practical way to do it if you do it right from the outset. If you don't, then it's harder. Nowadays, I suppose people can waxing is basically a form of plucking, or a more efficient form of plucking, where it can be done in one go. Again, all of these methods are permissible, because the purpose is cleanliness and removal. So you can shave, etc. It's recommended on Fridays and makruh to leave for more than 40 nights. So as you can see, the kind of recommended hygiene routine of a Muslim is starting to build up, right? So, you have your daily shower, etc., but your armpit hair is as long as your beard, right? Sorry to say, but sometimes that's what happens to people. From an Islamic from the point of view of Islamic norms, that's kind of disgusting. All right. It's that's gonna smell. It's the smelliest when it comes to hair, right? Body hair and smell. That is the smelliest part of the body, right? Why would anybody grow hair there? And that's the whole point about the sunnah of human nature. It would therefore logically make sense that it's sunnah and it's human nature to basically shave that. Why? Because that's a dark, damp area, right, where bacteria is likely to gather, which is basically why there's smell. And the same is true of the next one. Anyway, just to finish that off, it is recommended on Fridays and makruh to leave for more than 40 nights, same as the nails, and you'll see why in a second. Number 8 is shaving the pubic hairs. The pubic hair can be shaved, trimmed, or plucked, and almost certainly nowadays, again, people will probably use wax, etc. And the same principle applies. If you did it right from the outset, when it first began to grow, it's a lot less painful. Plucking is a lot less painful. If you didn't, probably a good idea to shave, because plucking is going to hurt. Removal of pubic hair is a sunnah agreed upon by all Muslim scholars. Shaving is specifically recommended in the sunnah, right? Because some of the hadith mentioned the word istihdad, which implies using a razor. Again, it's recommended on Fridays or weekly, and makruh to leave for more than 40 nights. So if you can't do it on Friday, do it weekly. If you can't do it Friday, do it Thursday night. If you want to do it in preparation for Jum'ah, otherwise you should do it weekly, and inshallah the mustahab will be fulfilled. Anas radiallahu anhu said it was set for us with regards to trimming the mustache, clipping the nails, plucking the armpits, and shaving pubic hair, that we do not leave that for more than 40 nights. So that's where the 40 nights thing comes from, and that's in Sahih Muslim. Another thing that's discussed by the fuqaha that I haven't put in the slides, but I'm going to mention now, and you need to remember this and make note of it, is that obviously pubic hair is what grows around the private parts, all right? Sometimes the hair kind of starts to thicken from below the belly button, sometimes lower. And basically the hair around the private parts, all of it, right? I shouldn't have to spell it out. All of it should be removed to keep the whole area clean, and protect it from smell and dampness and bacteria and so on, which is basically the benefit of it. Now, principally, if you consider the fact that the Sunnah recommends plucking the armpits and wherever hair is that is kind of like damp and that is likely to come in contact with najasa, that's where the bacteria is likely to grow, etc. It would follow that hair kind of around the hair that grows, particularly for men, at the rear on one's bottom, particularly kind of around the private part where it's likely to come in contact with najasa, it would follow that hair should also be removed, right? Because that's another kind of place that kind of where there can be bacteria growth and etc. But particularly, probably it should be more important because that's a place where najasa exists, right? Or the place comes in contact with najasa. Add to that the possibility of only using tissue, not using water being permissible. It would therefore follow that it's more important to also remove the hair there, particularly around the actual excretory passage, to use a nice word. And now the issue here is that the fuqaha haven't emphasized it in their writings as much as as much as spelling it out. They've just spoken of pubic hair in general. To discuss the issue, some fuqaha have said that pubic hair includes the hair of one's bottom or around the rear excretory passage. Other fuqaha have simply said, well, that's not been specifically mentioned, but it follows that it should be removed because the same reasons exist as the armpit hair and pubic hair, and therefore we won't say it's an emphasized sunnah, but it's mustahab to remove that. So my advice is basically, if it's long, if it kind of, if it holds water after istinja, it's likely that it will carry najasa, and najasa will hold on to it and so on, then perhaps one should, not necessarily as frequently as the rest of one's pubic hair, or not as frequently as the removal of armpit hair, one should keep it short or shaved. It's certainly something that the fuqaha mention as either mustahab or part of pubic hair. Okay, so I thought so that's pretty much the whole conversation with regards to pubic hair. Number 9, using water to clean one's private parts. This is istinja basically, right? So you know this, and we've discussed this hadith before. Number 10, rinsing the mouth, al-madmada, right, which is what we do in wudu. It is sunnah to do this well by gargling, and to do it after eating, etc. It is sunnah in wudu and obligatory in the ritual bath, as we will see later. And just like with the istinshaq, with the rinsing of the nose, I would say here madmada is also something that has been taught as a sunnah in and out of wudu, as part of oral hygiene. So it's reported in the sunnah the Prophet used to rinse his mouth and gargle after drinking milk or after having something fatty, etc. So it's kind of from that point of view. So madmada is something that when the Prophet did it, he did it extensively, which meant that he kind of moved the water in his mouth vigorously, gargled and so on, right? And it's all part of oral hygiene. I think if you speak to medical practitioners about this and about istinshaq, they will tell you that it's very, very good practice. And of course, we're blessed that the Prophet taught these things. And all of the Abrahamic faiths are blessed in that these were things that Allah gave to Ibrahim alayhi salam, and they have been taught. And that is not to say that they didn't exist before, but it was, obviously we know specifically that it was something that was given to Ibrahim alayhi salam to do. Number 11 is circumcision. Sorry, I'm just going back because I know that I've got the numbering wrong there. So take no notice of that. I think there's a discrepancy in the numbering. Okay, so anyway. Circumcision, right? So circumcision is an important sunnah mu'akkada in the Hanafi madhab. It's wajib according to other fuqaha. I mean, they say it's sunnah, but they practice it as a wajib, and they say that it's above other sunnah practices. The Hanafis, it's easy for them because they can simply apply the sunnah mu'akkada term, and Hanafis practice sunnah mu'akkada like it's wajib anyway. But it's an extremely emphasized sunnah. It's not obligatory, but it should be done, and it's seen as one of the things. The Muslims traditionally used to recognize it as one of the symbols, or as a customary norm, one of the things that symbolizes a person's Islam. And some of the fuqaha even say that if a whole community abandons circumcision, then the ruler should take action against them. So from that point of view, and we're talking about male circumcision here, as you'll see. So it is an important sunnah mu'akkada in the Hanafi madhab. It refers to the removal of the loose foreskin covering a male's penis. Circumcision prevents dirt from getting under the foreskin. When uncircumcised, one can suffer from irritation, infection, and other unpleasant conditions, including kind of sexual diseases. There is no set time for it, but should not be delayed past the age of 12. Some of the fuqaha have mentioned this. Nowadays, it is best to be done shortly after birth. The older the children get, the more painful it is. There are good procedures for it nowadays, and it is more painless for babies and heals quickly. But if you do it for a baby, you should do it before they start becoming too active and moving, because the movement in the nappy can cause problems. A stitch could come off, etc. Could cause bleeding and infection. So if you do it, it's better to kind of after the baby born, wait until the aqiqah and kind of do it just after the aqiqah. Okay, so 7 days, 14 days, 21 days that's when you do the aqiqah, and then kind of around that same time when the baby kind of sleeps a lot and is less active, get the circumcision out of the way. It's really, really straightforward. That's how I've done it with my children. And within 2 weeks they're back to normal. It takes a lot longer when you do it later on, right? When I was growing up, people we had it like 7, 8, 9, 10, 13, 14-year-olds were having circumcision, and I'm telling you, at the age, it's very, very painful. So it's much better to get it done at a younger age. Okay, this I probably didn't have to mention this because a lot of people probably might not even know about it, but there are good reasons why the issue should be understood. So therefore, female circumcision is also recommended according to many of the fuqaha. There's some evidence of it in the hadith, although they're not all authentic and so on. But the fuqaha, but it was something that was practiced before Islam and continued in Islam. And one of the hadith that address it, the Prophet ﷺ simply said to the woman who circumcised women, he simply said to her, the cut must be light, all right, and you don't cut too much because you will harm the person. Now, so this is pretty much all we've got as guidance from the Prophet ﷺ, that it should be a minimal cut, which kind of later Muslim medical practitioners nowadays have explained that it's very similar to male circumcision in that it is actually it's the removal of a piece of skin. It's a fairly minor procedure, and it has similar benefits in terms of health and hygiene and etc. However, it is not emphasized like male circumcision. It is practiced more in some Muslim lands, not at all in others, right? So, for example, where I come from in Bangladesh, it's unheard of. In places like Saudi Arabia, it isn't practiced, but in places like Egypt, Indonesia, North Africa, it's common practice for girls to be circumcised. However, in some places it is but it's practiced in Muslim cultures as well as non-Muslim cultures in places like Africa, right? However, in some places it is practiced in a hideous manner, resulting in serious harm to young girls and lifelong suffering. And this is known as female genital mutilation, or FGM, right? FGM is not circumcision. It totally mutilates basically the female private parts. And I mean, I have no idea how it happened, but people have done it. It's something that's been going on for thousands of years and so on. And I guess if you reflect back on the Prophet ﷺ and what's reported from him, I guess he knew that this was going on. So his kind of intervention was to say, like, you can't, like, it has to be a minor procedure, and it has its benefits, but it has to be a minor procedure, and you can't take out parts of the female private part or sexual organ. So anyway, but I wanted people to be aware of this, and it's because of this malpractice. You have all of these campaigns done by international charities against FGM, and FGM is a big deal. Sometimes it misrepresents female circumcision as FGM, and that's why I wanted to point it out. But in any case, due to widespread malpractice, many ulama in the Muslim world, Egypt, for example, have banned all forms of female circumcision, including the legitimate one, just to curb FGM, because people use the validity of female circumcision in Islam to kind of allow FGM to continue, right, and not to check the practice and curtail it and bring it under control and regulation. All right, So in Egypt, for example, the ulama initially said it can only be done by doctors and medical professionals in hospitals. It can't be done in villages by people who didn't know what they were doing or who weren't qualified. And then some ulama eventually completely banned it, saying that it shouldn't be done because it's continuing the practice of FGM. Anyway, and because in the case of women, all evidence that we do have suggests that for women, it's by no means as emphasized as it is for men. Some of the hadith just say it's just a makruma. It's a mark of respect for a woman as far as when it comes to circumcision. But when it comes to the men, it's seen as a mark of their Islam. It's emphasized, etc. It was so important that when Ibrahim alayhi salam was told about circumcision by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he had it done at a really old age. So it's much more emphasized for men, not so much for women. Also, the benefits to men are much more acknowledged scientifically and medically. It's much more, not so much among women. Although, in my reading, I've found that there are certain things that are recommended practices in women done in wealthy circles, and actually what they do is in fact circumcision, which is ironic. But anyway, this much information is enough. Inshallah, if you have any questions about this, then you can ask me for further clarifications. Practically speaking, I've not seen it practiced. In some communities it is practiced, and if it's practiced in your community, you need to make sure that what's being done is circumcision and it's not FGM. For people who don't do it, it's not, then you don't have to be concerned about it. It's not an issue. All right, it doesn't need to be done. Okay, other aspects of personal care. So this is the concluding section. It's already been quite a while. It's been quite a long lesson. I'm going to quickly run through these things. These are kind of additional from the Sunnah. It is Sunnah to wash hands before anything else when you wake up. So the Prophet ﷺ said that إِذَا اسْتَيْقَظَ أَحَدُكُم مِّن مَنَامِهِ فَلَا يَغْمِسَنَّ يَدَهُ فِي الْإِنَاءِ حَتَّى يَغْسِلَهَا ثَلَاثًا. When any of you wakes up in the morning, when you wake up from sleep rather, then you mustn't put your hands in any vessel. So because in the olden days, they would have washed from a bowl. And the Prophet ﷺ said, don't put your hands in the bowl until you've washed your hands 3 times, right? So the Prophet ﷺ recommended that they take water out of the bowl and pour water onto the hands and wash it 3 times before putting the hands in the bowl. And even though we have taps, the principle still applies. And the Prophet ﷺ said, فَإِنَّهُ لَا يَدْرِي أَيْنَ بَاتَتْ يَدُهُ. He doesn't know where his hands have been at night. One does not know where one's hands have been at night. They may have come in contact with najasa, etc. And therefore, the hands should be washed first thing as soon as a person wakes up from sleep, regardless of whether that's in the morning or after a nap during the day. But hands should be washed straight away. And the Prophet ﷺ specifically taught this. Number 2, 4 things are from the Sunnah of the Prophet. Using henna, but in the case of men, the use of henna is limited strictly to the beard and to the hair. So it's a hair coloring for men. It is not permissible for men. It is haram for men to use henna on their body, on their hands and on their feet. It's haram to use henna on the hands and on the feet for men, because that is understood to be the custom of women, and men and women are not allowed to resemble each other's customs. Right, so therefore, it's forbidden for men and women to use henna on their hands and on their feet. Recommended for women to do it because it's deemed a custom of female beauty. And the Prophet ﷺ actually frowned on a woman who didn't have henna on her hands. He was like, "Is this a man's hand or a woman's hand?" There's a famous hadith to that effect. So anyway, the point is that when it comes to the Sunnah of the Anbiya being men, we're talking about the henna being used for the hair and the beard. However, it seems that the Prophet ﷺ recommended wanted women to use henna for their hands and their feet. So I guess that's also a Sunnah for them. And you can do it with that intention and you'll be rewarded, inshallah ta'ala. And it's forbidden for men. And that's important to mention, since I've mentioned henna, because in some cultures, Bengali, in some customs, but for example, in Bengali culture, at wedding time and so on, men wear henna on their hands, which is completely against the Sharia. But for some weird reason, I don't know if this is if it's one of those cultural residues of our past in Bangladesh of Hinduism. perhaps it is, or our proximity to Hinduism, but it's not permissible in Islam. Please just remember that, when in weddings and so on. Okay, the next one is using perfume, using the siwak and nikah. So this is all from a hadith. There's a hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where basically the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Arba'un min sunan al-mursalin, al-hina, wa-ta'attur, wa-siwak, wa-nikah." So these are the 4 things. When it comes to perfume, I guess you can't talk about perfume without explaining the differences in practice between men and women. So women can also use perfume, but it's haram for them to use it in a manner that strange men, i.e. non-mahrams, can smell it. All right. So therefore, women should limit its use when venturing out. I suppose if I was to really nail it down, then I would say deodorants and light perfume can be used, but with the intention to not smell bad, not the intention to kind of smell good for men, right? If you're not going to be in the company of men, it's fine. If you're gonna pass by men, be around men, then you have to limit the use of perfume so that a man cannot smell the perfume on you in normal interaction, right? So a strange man isn't going to come right up to you, right? So therefore, that's not an issue. But you shouldn't wear so much perfume that if a person was passing by or in normal interaction, for example, in the office, etc., they'd be able to smell your perfume. All right, it's really important because this is expressly forbidden. It's expressly forbidden. Women need to be careful about that. All right, and the other reason why I need to mention it is because, I'm sure I'm not the only one that notices how much perfume women use, Muslim women, to the extent that it's not even pleasant. Like you walk past a woman from she's 3 or 4 feet away, and you have to hold your nose because of how strong the perfume smell is. Either somehow women have started to smell really bad as a result of which they have to use so much perfume, or it's just a ridiculous custom, right? So my point is, this is not just a matter of preference. This is a matter of Sharia. Women cannot use perfume excessively when they go out, right? Deodorants, I understand, of course, because deodorants are about not smelling bad. It's about controlling body odor. That's perfectly legitimate. And usually the smell of deodorant doesn't go beyond the person, right? It's on the skin. But perfume use, external perfume use, must be limited. So to the extent that a person is confident that it's not something that a passerby can smell, or somebody standing across me can smell, if it's a male, right? If you're going to meet your female friends, or that's who you're going to be around, etc., or his family and relatives and so on, you can use all the perfume that you like, but please, not so much that that some of us can't breathe. I'm joking. But it is a genuine observation. Sometimes I actually do feel like I have to hold my nose. That's how much perfume people use. But if it's to that extent and you're a Muslim woman, then stop, because it's actually haram, right? It's kind of irrelevant that I personally don't like it. It may be that another man will like it. So that's it. That little rant from me is irrelevant. It's haram. That's the bottom line. Okay. So the third kind of additional matter of personal care is combing and oiling the hair and beard. This is recommended as part of one's grooming and a sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You should do it as much as you need it. Don't overdo it. Don't take out your care. You don't kind of take out your comb all the time. And comb your hair all the time and comb your beard all the time. There's some hadith that indicate that it should be done once every other day. But I guess it's difficult to prescribe something like that because it depends on a person's hair. So yeah, when your hair is messy, it needs to be combed, comb it. Don't neglect it. Don't kind of just let your hair and beard be unruly, like I said. The Prophet ﷺ liked combing, he liked oiling, he did it regularly. And some of the hadith indicate that he did it every other day. But I would suppose combing is something that he would have done more frequently than oiling. And the Prophet ﷺ used to part his hair in the middle, and he used to apply oil as well as perfume to his hair and his beard to the extent that it glistened, the oil glistened in the light. And so this is also part of a kind of the grooming kind of regime, and it applies to both men as well as to women. And I'm going to remind you of the hadith I mentioned earlier: whoever has hair should respect it. And that means whoever has hair, it means that whoever has hair, they should take care of it, because as we now know very well, that when you don't take care of hair, then it gets damaged. Okay, you develop conditions, dandruff, etc., etc. So it's important to take care of it. Okay, number 4, using kohol isn't really a matter of hygiene, but I thought since I've mentioned all of the others, I might as well mention this one as well. And that's, in India they call it surma. Don't know why they call it that actually, but it's called kohol actually in Arabic. Funny enough, that's what I think eyeliner is. No, not eyeliner. Yeah, so that pencil, that marker that women use in women's makeup, they call it kohol as well. So it's actually an Arabic word, I believe. Anyway, but what we're talking about here is surma, or the kohol, that is this black powder that basically is used as kohol over the eyes. It has health benefits, etc. The Prophet said it's good for the eyes and so on, and he specifically recommended a type of kohol called ithmid, which you can inquire about online or in Islamic shops and so on. Is widely available to buy in the Muslim world when people go on Hajj. And basically it's sunnah. That's not something specific to women, but rather it is sunnah for men and women, and the Prophet ﷺ used to use it. Okay, inshallah. Number 6, it is sunnah to take a bath on Fridays in preparation for Jum'ah. One should, so that's specifically as kind of, I would say, as an additional thing, because I'm not very comfortable with the idea of people only taking a bath on Fridays. And therefore, it's important to state that one should shower frequently to stay clean and not cause harm and discomfort to others due to body odor. The same is true of one's clothes. And if you have body odor, some people have it more than others, then it's simple: shower more frequently. It's not acceptable to just carry on and be unmindful and heedless of the effect you have on other people. And sometimes people are polite and they don't say anything. But it's extremely important. So if you've sweated, or if you know that after a few hours your body smells and so on, then you should carry perfume and deodorant and use it. Women should carry deodorant, not perfume, and frequently use that, and shower more frequently. All right. Otherwise I would say, daily, every other day, whatever works, but frequent. And number 7, as already implied in the emphasis on brushing and siwak, one should be conscious of one's breath, especially if there is a reason for strong smell. I think from earlier when we were talking about it, you can see that was something that was very important to the Prophet ﷺ, and you'll see how important it is now even more. For example, the Prophet ﷺ forbade people from coming to the masjid after eating onions or garlic. I think the hadith also mentions leek, right? Which I think it's also, I'm not quite clear in my head as to, but my understanding is leek is like onion. It tastes like onion. So I suppose it also leaves a strong smell in one's mouth. These are not haram to eat, but one should be mindful of one's breath and freshen it. So therefore, it's kind of obvious that we're talking about when these things are raw, or like they still have that strong smell. Sometimes even if they're cooked or partly cooked, they still have the smell. Sometimes some people use it in salads, etc. Yeah, in chutneys and things like that. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Whoever eats onion, garlic, and leek should not come near our masjid. For angels are harmed, i.e. annoyed and aggravated by that which harms the children of Adam." Quite a serious issue. The angels are affected by it. Another hadith states that if one must eat them, then eat them cooked. So there you go. So the point of the matter is, this is kind of important. I'll give you a little personal anecdote, right? I once not once, but I've stood next to people in prayer who had such a strong oniony type smell to their breath. I think that's what it was, because whatever it was awful. It's one of the most pungent, most disgusting smells I've ever smelled. I don't know. It could be not, maybe it's not just the onions, but it's poor oral hygiene and all of that coming together. But it was disgusting. And I think it also combined with curry smell on clothes and everything. Wallahi, I could barely hold on to my concentration in Salah. At one point, I wanted to break my Salah and walk away. That's how bad it was. That is harm. That person, Allah forgive him and give me patience, that person is harming me with his smell, right? And he's next to me in Salah. I can't do anything. I can't move away. We're in the Jama'ah. I'm stuck with it, right? So people should be mindful of how they smell, right? You should be mindful of one's breath. You should be mindful. If you've spent time in the kitchen, then your clothes are going to smell of curry. And that's a really nasty, especially Asian people and the kind of food, the way we cook and so on. That's a really horrible smell, right? And we should try to be mindful of it. That one's sometimes really difficult, because sometimes, you're sitting in another room, but because there's cooking happening, right, you end up with it on your clothes. It's on your jacket because the cooking, the steam, etc., traveled and that. Anyway, but the point is that be mindful of it. All right, be mindful of it. Change clothes, take showers. Women should shower after cooking. Have clothes that you can wear when you're cooking, etc., etc. If that is the case, make sure the kitchen is well ventilated. This is about making sure that the whole point of the whole philosophy of this kind of hygiene, one aspect of it is the Prophet ﷺ didn't want people to harm others with their smell. All right, and he made that expressly clear. Okay, inshallah. That's it. Okay, so these are all matters of personal hygiene. We discussed them through Sunnah al-Fitrah. And these are all things that aren't just for us, but they're things, these are customs. This is our culture, right? This is what we pass on to our children. This is what we bring our children up on. Okay, inshallah. So everyone, please take this on. So this is all kind of discussed in a disorganized manner in fiqh books normally. I thought I'd gather it. So it's kind of taking maybe longer than usual to put this together. And inshallah, I'm hoping that I'm gonna put this out maybe just as a video for everyone to use, not even it's part of the course, but maybe put it out there so that everybody can see and benefit from it, inshallah ta'ala. We'll see how it goes. Jazakumullah khairan. I believe the next lesson is going to take us to wudu, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.